Chapter 7. The heavy iron door opened, and Ranyth walked into the room, the light from his torch rippling over the chiseled rock walls before revealing the figure seated on the floor. Paul's legs were splayed outward, his head down and his shackled hands in his lap. Chains attached to the manacles ran through a metal ring embedded in the wall above him, allowing him only enough slack to move around a small corner of his cell. He was upon a layer of straw that constituted his bed, and a plate of untouched food was on the floor beside him. Ranyth regarded this scene momentarily before putting the torch in a nearby sconce and turned to the guards who had followed him in. Ranyth whispered to the 2 guards who left the room. Paul heard their footsteps. It sounded as if they were ascending a stairway. Ranyth waited at the door and watched them leave, then closed it behind him. He walked over and stood before Paul, nudging the plate of food with his foot. "Eltherea complained of the food, too. Should I give the cook the sack?" he said in English, chuckling. Paul was surprised to hear his native language. How'd Ranyth come by it? He realized he never asked Ellie how she had. Did she perform the magic on herself with spit collected from an unwitting donor in Minneapolis? Wait, how did she learn Morse code overnight? Did she steal my saliva? If I survive this, I have some questions for her, he thought, fighting back his tears. He would not let this bastard see him cry. The elf sat down on his haunches and grabbed Paul's chin, lifting his face to the light. "That's quite a shiner I gave you. My apologies. Oftentimes I forget the strength in this body compared to one of your kind. Nothing broken, at least, according to the healer." Paul looked defiantly at Ranyth without responding and jerked his head free from his hand. Ranyth laughed. "Well, you have spirit, I'll give you that." He stood up and began to pace the small room, speaking as much to himself as he was to Paul. "I am curious, when did you enter Tuloth? After Eltherea was brought here, and my elf had returned to his body, he reported there had been another with her, but I assumed it was a companion from Cheness. Maybe that was you, though. Tell me, how did you come to know her?" Paul stayed silent. Something wasn't making sense, though that something was too vague for him to grasp yet. "Not feeling talkative, eh? Well, I could help with that. I promised to keep you from further harm, and I'm a man of my word, though I would prefer conversation. You may not believe it, but we have much in common beyond our evident desire for the beautiful Eltherea. Are you from Minneapolis? St. Paul, maybe? That is typically the case when men end up in the area near Cheness. Yet your attire is so queer. This shirt you have on with what looks to be a child's cartoon on it and a strange printed word. I never saw the like when I lived there. Is it some kind of sigil?" He said, "when I lived there," thought Paul. It didn't seem possible, but then this was a world of magic. "Levi?" Paul said uncertainly. The one they called Ranyth looked down at him with a grin and bowed theatrically. "But how?" he asked, unable to suppress his curiosity. "'Tis one of my proudest achievements. These elves are naive creatures. They weren't prepared for one so cunning as myself. But before I tell you that story, I hope you'll humor me and listen to the genesis of my reign here. It's been so long since I've talked to another human, and so much of my brilliance I can't speak on, even to those most loyal to me. Aren't you worried I'll tell people at the wedding or afterwards?" "No," Levi laughed. "Not in the least." Levi stopped pacing and stood staring into the flame of the torch, and began. "My parents came to the Minnesota Territory when it was known as the New England of the West and settled in Minneapolis. My father got work at the first flour mill built there, and I was born within earshot of the falls. The town and I grew up together, and the same year I turned 13 and joined my father at the mill, the town became a city. 2 years later, I watched our house get swept away when the Hennepin Island Tunnel collapsed. 8 years after that, my father lost his arm to the gears, was fitted with a wooden one, and was back to work the next week. Then the Washburn A mill exploded, and took the one we were working at nearby with it. As I walked amongst the rubble with my ears ringing, I thought there must be a better way to earn my daily bread, as it were." He chuckled and went on. "Then I thought of Lord Gordon, whom I'm sure you remember." Paul shook his head. No? That's surprising, given that his capture in Canada by my fellow countrymen nearly started a war. It was in all the papers. He was a Scottish nobleman who arrived in Minneapolis in 71 to buy land for resettling tenants from his overcrowded plots in Scotland. Hungry for his money, the railroad spent tens of thousands so that he could travel in comfort as he surveyed the countryside, telling people to address him as "my lord." It was only later, when he was in New York, that his deception was uncovered. Turned out he was just a poor bloke from England with the stones of a rich one. Many here were angry enough to send a party to kidnap him after he fled the country. I, however, found him inspiring. Here was a self-made man in the truest sense. So I, too, set about becoming someone else. I looked at the confidence tricks being played on the rubes in Minneapolis, of which there were many. The mediums who told fortunes or removed curses while removing your money were mostly women, and other spiritualism cons involved a partner, so those weren't good options. I also had no interest to learn the card tricks being played in the side streets of the city. Then, during another outbreak of typhoid, it occurred to me what people needed was relief from their suffering. Taking some empty perfume bottles from my mother, I filled them with water and a purple dye I made from flowers I collected by the river, and sold them as medicine. It turned out I had a gift convincing people that before them stood a man capable of curing all their ills. I was, after all, a world-renowned doctor. Soon, Dr. Vermillion's violet elixir was selling like hotcakes, and with no overhead, I made enough money to move out of my parents' house. One day I walked to the river to gather more flowers, but was having trouble finding any. I began to think on another source for the dye when I spotted the most magnificent purple thistles. They grew in a patch surrounded by a circle of large stones. I clipped the flowers, put them in my bag, and started back. As I walked, I became disorientated. The sun was not where it should have been. Somehow it was already setting. I climbed up the bank, but there was no road, no buildings. I thought I had taken a wrong turn, but there were the falls, yet wild they were now, with no apparent man-made structures to tame them. It was too dark to move on, so I stopped there, hoping that in the morning I would return to my senses. After a restless sleep, I awoke to the same confounding scene. There was the Mississippi, but with no city of Minneapolis surrounding it. In the distance, I spotted a horse and rider, and I went and followed the path that they took. As I did, it struck me that, though it seemed trees had replaced buildings, much was still familiar. I wondered if I'd been sent back in time. Was I walking in a country that had yet to be visited by my European ancestors? I thought of the Dickens book, when Scrooge is sent to Christmas past, but not having been visited by a spirit, I doubted that was the case. I walked on, not sure what to believe. Then, after traveling past the distance and direction that would have normally ended me in St. Paul, I climbed over a hill and beheld a village below. When I approached the tree archway and saw the people in their simple dress, their bows and arrows, and their tree houses, I thought I was seeing an unknown Indian tribe. But while I'd heard of captive settlers and runaway slaves mixing in, this tribe looked to have all the races a man represented. Then I saw their ears and witnessed their magic, and I knew where I was. I had entered the realm of the Fey folk. I was in the land of Fairy. My ma had told me stories of the old country, of people going missing for months and returning, saying they had spent a day in a magical land. When she was a baby, her mother had put iron in her crib to stop any fairies from stealing her and leaving a changeling behind. I dismissed these as superstitions of a simple people in an old land. They had no place in the new world we lived in, with our science and technological marvels. Also, I had never heard such reports in the Americas, but I could not deny what was right before my eyes. Though I found their race mixing repellent and unnatural, I had no choice but to ingratiate myself with these strange people. Naturally, I consorted with the fairer complected among them, and found a friend in Ranyth who was simple but kind. From him I learned of the past, of the great wars and the kings who wielded power from their stone fortresses. I convinced him to bring me to Ranyth, and then of the wisdom of rebuilding it. I found more in Chinese I could bend to my will, as years of living a leaderless life had left them as naive as children. But there were some who resisted my words, and none so galling as Eltherea. From the moment I saw her, I knew I had to have her, and her rejection of my advances only strengthened my resolve. Unfortunately, I was no match for her strength, despite her gender. "So you're a racist and a rapist. You're a real piece of shit, you know that?" Paul interrupted. "Again, your speech is so strange. Not familiar with that first word, but I'm no bigot if that's what you mean. It's not about hate. I hate no one. The races should not intermingle, though. It leads to impure blood. Back in Minneapolis, they strove for the purity of the flower. The whitest, most consistent was the most desirable. It is the same among people, and elves. It is all confused here now, but I'm working to make things right. As for your second claim against me, I deny that too. But if Eltherea does not submit to me the night of our wedding, well, it is her sacred duty as my wife, and she will do as God commands." "Your God is not here in Tulath," Paul said, "and Ellie won't let you touch her again." "Ellie? You call her Ellie?" Levi looked at Paul thoughtfully, then continued. "Curious, you say, 'my God.' You are not a Christian?" "Sorry, not a believer." "Amazing. Don't think I've met an atheist before. Well, let me tell you, God is master of all realities, even this one. My mother told me that fairies serve the devil, and that is where their magic comes from. Being here has confirmed that for me. Who do they worship? The sixth, a number associated with the devil. That they sire offspring who can be of any race is another unholy attribute. Didn't stop you from using their magic to get what you wanted, though, did it?" "A necessary evil. When I have more power here, I will ban its use. Until then, I will play my part. Our wedding will be an elven ceremony, but I will bless our union myself, being the only Christian in this pagan place." "I just realized something. You can't do magic, can you? You have Ranyth's strength, but your mind is still human. I bet that pisses you off. No wonder you don't want anyone else doing it." "I've no need for it, not when I can command men's hearts and minds." Levi paused, then said, annoyed, "You've sidetracked me with your interruption. Now where was I? Oh yes, perhaps my most ingenious con yet. Yes, I was able to convince many to turn to their old ways and help rebuild this fortress, but I knew I could not truly rule as a man here. I knew their practice of dwelling, of course, and I wondered if the switch could happen between elf and human. I questioned Ranyth as innocently as I could. He said he had never heard of it being done, but it might be possible. I dared not ask him to try, as that would be too telling of my ambition, so I devised a plan. If it didn't work, I'd still be fine, so there was no real danger in the attempt. That day I returned to Triathale, after Eltherea had spurned me. I knew it was time. The next day word would reach Ranyth, and he would likely cast me out. So that night I brought him into the caves below this structure. I told him I needed to show him something, and as he trusted me, I had no need to elaborate. There are deep holes down there filled with water, and some days before I had found one that suited my purpose perfectly. As we walked through the rough terrain, I pretended to slip and fall into it. Ranyth believed I couldn't swim, something I had told him in passing once. I cried for help, but the hole was too narrow. There was no room for him to jump in to save me, and it was too deep for him to reach me from the ground. I flailed and then went silent to make him think I was drowning. I was beginning to fear my ploy had failed, but then I found myself standing above the hole, looking down. I had tried to mentally prepare for that moment, but the sensation was unlike anything I'd ever known. There was a rock I had placed near the hole earlier, which had taken much effort in my human form. While he had found a foothold and began to climb up, I picked it up with ease and dropped it. It knocked Ranyth out, sealing the hole and his fate. I waited there, first to ensure there was no sign of life, then to practice speaking with my new mouth. I had studied him long enough, knew his idioms and his cadence, but manipulating a new tongue, well, that was tricky. I must have conquered it, though, for later, when I told the others that Levi had left abruptly, they were none the wiser. News of my, Levi's that is, betrayal of Ranyth's trust came from Chinese the next day, so his departure made sense to all here. I played the part of enraged and protective lover well, enough to fool even Eltherea. Your only friend here switched bodies with you so that you might live, and you killed him. You're a fucking psycho, Paul said. I did what I must. God has brought me to this land for a reason, and when I am recognized as a king by all, through me he shall cleanse this land and make it holy. Thought you said the elves serve the devil. That includes Eltherea, right? Wouldn't think God would be too happy for you for marrying her. I will bring her into God's light. She'll be baptized and born anew, and through her example others will follow. I shall be as St. Patrick in Ireland, casting out the serpents of Satan and ushering in the dawning of a new era in this land. Now you're a saint? You know, I'm starting to think you're more than just evil and power-hungry. I think you're delusional. Ranyth ignored this. What I can't understand is her reticence to join me as my queen. Through her station, she could wield such influence. It's as if she doesn't know the history of her own world. Oh, she knows it better than you, that's for sure. She even knew Minneapolis' history more than most who lived there. Paul realized he had said too much. He could tell Ranyth was processing what that meant. So, Eltherea traveled to other place, did she? That's how she met you. Interesting. I'll hazard that she knows English now, too. In that case, more must be done to ensure you don't interrupt our wedding with any of what I've told you today. And what's stopping me from telling the guards of your deceit once you leave? Manan inclomnia, tia yarda, ti palatain, akiande tia ansias? Stunned, Paul realized he could no longer understand Elvish. Yes, turns out the gift of their tongue can be rescinded. I instructed a guard to remove it before you awoke. Now, I must be going. There is much to do to prepare for my big day. Ranyth removed the torch and walked to the door. Before he exited, he turned back, telling Paul, "Oh, and Paul, please do eat something. We want you healthy for the ceremony, and I hear that being force-fed is an entirely unpleasant experience." The door shut, and Paul was alone in the dark, cold cell once again. Ranyth is Levi. That fact struck him as monumental, but without the ability to communicate that revelation to anyone, he felt all the more helpless. I came back to save Ellie, Paul thought, but she would have been free of him if I hadn't. I've just made things worse. As he sat on his bed of straw, his hands weighed down with iron, the strains of a familiar tune drifted through his mind. Now, though, instead of solace, the song only caused him more pain.